Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Margot, and I'm the manager of public programs here at the Brooklyn Museum, and I'm joined by ASL interpreter Efrain Rodriguez and later Theo Hamilton. Thank you, Efrain and Theo, for expanding this conversation tonight. It is my absolute honor to welcome you to our first Brooklyn Reads celebration of 2025. Happy Gregorian New Year. We have the extreme privilege tonight of hearing Irvin Weathersby Jr. read from, yes, let's hear it for Irvin. We have the privilege of hearing him read from and discuss his debut book, In Open Contempt, Confronting White Supremacy in Art and Public Space. In Open Contempt reckons with the ongoing anti-Black racism in the United States, as represented by monuments, street signs, and schools named after slave owners, segregationists, and white supremacists. In this book, Irvin engages curators, city planners, and artists, including some artists in the Brooklyn Museum's collection, whose work considers the specter of white supremacy in public space. This interrogation continues to be so necessary and critical to our field of museums and visual culture, and I am deeply grateful to Irvin that we're able to host this discussion here tonight. Our program will start with a musical performance by Dezron and Seth Trachy, followed by a reading by Irvin. Afterwards, Irvin will be accompanied by author Robert Jones Jr. for a discussion of the book and the process of writing it. Afterwards, we hope that you'll please stick around because we'll have copies of both authors' books for sale and also time for personalized signing. Without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce each of our participating artists, and I'll do so in the order that they'll be on stage. Bassist, composer, band leader, and educator Dezron has established himself as a major force in contemporary creative music. A protege of the great Jackie McLean, the Downbeat magazine 2019 Rising Star is known for his work with Pharoah Sanders, Ravi Coltrane, Cyrus Chestnut, David Murray, Louis Hayes, Enrico Rava, and also the piano legends George Cables, Eric Reed, Mulgrew Miller, and Benny Green. Seth Trachy is a Brooklyn-based saxophonist who grew up in the rural Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. He fell in love with music through his father's diverse record collection. After winning recognition in Downbeat magazine in high school, he went on to study at William Patterson University on full scholarship. In his own words, Seth has been fascinated with music of the African diaspora. Of particular interest has been the music of Baka Pygmies of Cameroon, which he arranged for jazz quintet on his debut album, Zigman, featuring MacArthur Fellow Miguel Zenon. As a co-leader, Seth has released albums featuring Steve Cardenas and Kenny Werner. Irvin Weathersby Jr. is a Brooklyn-based writer and professor from New Orleans. He teaches at Queensborough Community College and at City College in the MFA Creative Writing program. His writing has been featured in Guernica, Esquire, The Atlantic, Ebony, and elsewhere. He holds an MFA from the New School, an MA from Morgan State University, and a BA from Morehouse College, and he has received fellowships and awards from the Voices of Our Nation's Art Foundation, the Research Foundation of CUNY, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the Mellon Foundation. He's the author of In Open Contempt. Last but certainly not least, Robert Jones Jr., formerly known as Son of Baldwin, is a Brooklyn, New York-based writer and public speaker. He's the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, The Prophets, which we have available for purchase tonight, which was a finalist for the 2021 National Book Award for Fiction. His writings have been featured in the New York Times, Essence, Variety, and the Paris Review. And you're invited to subscribe to Robert's newsletter, Witness, at robertjonesjr.substack.com. Without further ado, please help me in giving a warm Brooklyn welcome to Dezron and Seth Trachy.
Dezron Douglas. Seth Trachy.
How y'all doing? Y'all good? First, I just want to say thank you to these wonderful musicians. I feel like jazz is like my heartbeat, and they make me feel so alive right now. So let's do it. A couple other things I want to say. This book came out a week ago, and I'm just so overjoyed that it's now here in the world, and I could share it with you. I also want to give incredible thanks to the team who worked on this book, all of whom are composed of the global majority. So I just want to say that we did this together. We're trying to rep for people that look like us and the global majority. So I just want to say that. Last thing I want to say before I get into this reading is there's a brilliant, beautiful person in the audience who also goes by my wife. I just want to give her incredible thanks. None of this would be possible without her brilliance. Some of you have read some of the pages, and you know that she's kind of a co-star in this. So check for her. You can get her autograph at the end too, if you want. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of the book here, from the prologue. If that's okay with you guys. All right. Losers and trophies. We possess two basic versions of American history. One which is written and as neatly stylized as ancient myth, and the other unwritten and as chaotic and full of contradictions, changes of pace, and surprises as life itself. Ralph Ellison. 3 miles west of the Mississippi, on the vast patch of grass called the neutral ground that lies in the middle of our streets, I met a group of white supremacists lounging under a tent. 3 of them stationed there like sentinels guarding the bust of Charles Didier Drew. As I pulled up, I couldn't see much behind a fortress of flags. Confederate flags, American flags, MAGA flags, and black and white American flags with a single red stripe. As was their purpose, they scared the shit out of me. I had driven there to see the raised monument of Jefferson Davis at the center of the neutral ground on the south side of Canal Street, but the ring of flags on the north side compelled my approach. 2 oversized banners faced the street and were even harder to ignore. One read, "Mitch lied. $2.1 million monument removal over murder rate." Another headline read, "Mitch's 2017 scoreboard," and tallied 88 murders and over 300 shootings. "Worst in America," summarized the count at the bottom in red cursive script. Mitch was Mitch Landrieu, then mayor of New Orleans. It was a humid Friday afternoon, and I stood on the corner sweating, processing the scene. If I was going to do this, I thought it wise to make my presence known. So I lingered in the green space between the tent and banners to let them see me before I proceeded. I didn't know what to expect and fixed my gaze on the statue as I walked slowly around the perimeter, afraid to meet their eyes. Shaking, my adrenaline pumping, I settled on the lawn off to the side so that I could still see them in my periphery. I had never met white supremacists face to face, at least none who were so shameless. And I knew my stunt, the exercise of my right to occupy any public space, had the potential to further enshrine the memorial with my blood. I should tell you that this happened 2 months before Charlottesville, when Heather Heyer was run over by a car in August 2017. I should also tell you that her murder wouldn't have turned me around, at least not then. I couldn't just retreat after everything I had already seen, after every one of us they had killed. So I took a deep breath and collected myself. I had to figure out why Drew was so important. The inscription etched on the face of his pedestal read, Colonel Charles Didier Drew, born in New Orleans, May 11, 1832. First Confederate officer from Louisiana killed in the war between the states on the Field of Honor near Newport News on July 5, 1861. His last words were, "Boy steady, nobler, braver never lived." Had I been there a day or so earlier, the words would have been obscured by a messy anarchist symbol, striking and full of color when it was first sprayed, but now faintly visible, like a red watermark hiding behind the text. Drew's nose, blasted off like Napoleon had allegedly defaced the Sphinx, ruined his rather handsome, boyish depiction, his mustache thick and droopy, the crown of his hair carefully combed to his right temple. 4 pairs of decorative buttons finished his double-breasted uniform and rose to a mock collar where stars were pinned. A wreath just above the inscription punctuated the mournful sentiment. As I stood there inspecting it, my chest pounding with anxiety, the youngest of the 3 approached me slowly, as if to suggest his benign intentions. "How are you today, sir?" he said, smiling under a dingy trucker hat, his face scruffy and sincere. "Good. How are you folks doing today?" I returned with a half smile and sought each pair of eyes. A heavy-set woman was in a folding chair to the right, and in the back, a man with a weathered face and stained, dusty clothes lounged in a beach chair next to a cooler. "What brings you down here?" the young man asked. "I came to see the monuments and get a feel for the city after all the controversy," I said uneasily. "Well, I'm happy that folks from out of town are starting to see that we have a problem," said the older man. "I'm from here, actually, but I live in Brooklyn," I confessed, before regretting it, wondering if my outsider status might keep me safe. "That's why we're here," said the young man. "A buddy of mine called and said that he needed some protection." "For what?" I asked. "The desecration of public property," said the young man. "There were some folks who were just being nasty," added the woman. "Things were getting physical, and we're here to show them that we won't be pushed around." "But doesn't everyone have a right to express how they feel, just like you folks?" I said, my voice cracking. "I mean, you're sitting here surrounded by Confederate flags." "This is our heritage," she responded with more force. "Look, you seem like a sensible guy," the young man said, inching closer to me. "Can I ask you what caused the Civil War?" I paused to find the right words. "There were many reasons, but let's say economics," I responded. "Right. The North had all the money and wanted to keep the South poor," the woman added quickly. "Well," I said, "the South had all of its wealth and enslaved Africans." Silence. "You can't erase history," the woman finally shot back. "You know, I used to enjoy looking up at Beauregard's statue, how beautiful it was at night under the lights, him looking so powerful on that big old horse. And I would be proud of where I live. But now that's gone." She was nearly screaming by this point, her face reddening. "And the man built the streetcars and designed the sewer system. He was important to this city. He fought for his country and became an American hero. I tell you what, Mitch will never get another job in the state of Louisiana," said the man in the lounge chair. "I doubt he wants to stay," I said with a smile, surprising myself. I could now sense their pain, each of them too wounded to harm me. "He was just grandstanding, motivated by his own political agenda." The man opened the cooler and cracked a beer before continuing. "He's the only mayor in America who wants to be in the White House." He had a point. Mitch Landrieu had done the unthinkable when he authorized the removal of 4 statues, citing how these symbols had inspired a white supremacist to kill 9 parishioners in South Carolina at Mother Emanuel AME Church in 2015. The musician and hometown hero Wynton Marsalis, had urged Landrew to remove the Robert E. Lee Monument. And in the months that followed, Landrew began researching the site's history and soliciting support from leaders throughout the community. The first to fall was the Battle of Liberty Place Monument, an obelisk that had been situated steps away from the riverfront that honored an attack on the city's police force by white supremacists. Jefferson Davis's bronze statue was second. Then went the statue of P.G.T. Beauregard, the general who had won the first battle for the Confederacy in the Civil War. Finally, the defiant arms-crossed image of Robert E. Lee was removed from its 60-foot pedestal at the center of a roundabout that divides the central business district from uptown. After each had fallen, one protest after another threatened to erupt into tragedy, and the tipping point was a speech from Landrew that seemed to promise more. The force of revolution in his words shocking me beyond belief. Quote, "New Orleans was America's largest slave market, a port where hundreds of thousands of souls were brought, sold, and shipped up the Mississippi River to lives of forced labor, of misery, of rape, of torture. America was the place where nearly 4,000 of our fellow citizens were lynched, 540 alone in Louisiana, where the courts enshrined separate but equal, where freedom riders coming to New Orleans were beaten to a bloody pulp." So when people say to me that the monuments in question are history, well, what I just described is real history as well, and it's the searing truth. And it immediately begs the questions, why there are no slave ship monuments, no prominent markers on public land to remember the lynchings or the slave blocks, nothing to remember this long chapter of our lives, the pain, the sacrifice, the shame, all of it happening on the soil of New Orleans. As if refuting the truth, the woman screamed, "This is New Orleans. He's taking money from our firefighters and police officers to erase history. You can't erase history. He's letting this city run wild," the man in the beach chair added. "There are murders every night." "Can I ask you folks a question?" I interjected. "How would you feel if the money to remove the monuments came from somewhere else?" Silence. They didn't care that the people dying in the streets were black, that the murders were caused by centuries of injustice, that half the money to use to remove the monuments came from private donors. "I tell you what," I said after a moment, "I really appreciate y'all right to believe what y'all believe, but your heroes were devils. I hope they take them all down. See this flag?" I asked, pointing to the Confederate flag. "It reminds me of the time when my ancestors were property, and I don't like it. It's our heritage," said the woman. "I don't value that heritage. I believe in this one," I said, pointing now to the American flag, shaking with nervous rage. "This one replace yours. Losers don't get trophies." Silence. "I really appreciate y'all taking the time to talk with me," I finally said, and offered my hand to the surprised young man who hesitated before extending his own. I squeezed it firmly, but not aggressively, as a sour, defeated expression emerged on his face. The woman picked up her phone and walked away. "You take care now," said the man in the beach chair, his tone absent of anger. I then turned toward the statue and took pictures as if they weren't there, unbothered, feeling like I had won something, the sentiment of relief from how I had felt earlier in the day, when the police officer who murdered Philando Castile was cleared on all charges. It was a feeling I had felt before, of course, the denial of justice so common that the grief becomes ritual. The anger eventually gives way to sadness, and we place our beloved's memory in the company of all those we've lost without redress. I'll never forget Castile's traffic stop, how his last moments were broadcast live via his girlfriend's Facebook feed. I'll never forget how he was shot 7 times in 40 seconds. I'll never forget who he was, because months before his murder, I was almost a victim in a similar scene with the police that made me fear for my life. I can accept that Castile's death may never be honored and commemorated like Drew's, but in that moment, I realized the wins still left to count. We were catching white supremacy slipping, and soon, I hope, we would conquer the beast, one memorialized nose at a time. Thank you. So now I have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming my friend, my brother, Robert Jones Jr. on stage for conversation. All right? All right, let's do this.
Before we get started, I would like to shout out the Lenape people whose land we are sitting upon, standing upon, stolen from them many, many moons ago. To quote our brother Dante Stewart, I want to ask you, Irv, how are you doing in this present moment?
There's a lot to hold right now, right? You know, we're dealing with terrorist attacks in New Orleans. On the first of the year, there was a terrorist attack in New Orleans, which was heartbreaking. We're dealing with a lot of wildfires, right? We're all holding our own personal traumas as well. But in the midst of that, I want to say that there's room for joy, and this moment right here is joyous. This is really a dream come true. So,
y'all showed up. This is real. Yes, indeed. Before we get into this incredible book that you've written, could you tell me, because I don't think I even know this, why do you write? What is it about Irvin, the human being, that makes him choose writing as art form?
Wow, that's an incredible question. You know, I don't know if I chose writing versus it chose me, honestly. I was very fortunate enough to have some incredible ancestors who noticed that I had a gift very early on, and they began feeding me books. And my grandmother, who this book is dedicated to, was really the principal architect for my writing life. And I remember, you know, ever since I was a young boy at 4 years old, like writing and reading. And as I progressed and gotten older, I realized that if I'm not writing or reading, I'm not myself. I'm irritable, and I don't like who I am because I'm not feeding my purpose. That's what I'm destined to be. That's how we got here.
I completely understand that. Now on to the book. Bro, can we talk about this cover? Yo. This cover is fantastic. Like, if you see this on the bookshelf, I just want to buy it based on the cover. I mean, it's just beautiful. How did this come about?
Wild story. I think this is a story that I think also speaks to the book and how the book kind of came together. So many stars aligned. Ultimately, my team at Viking asked me what covers I was thinking about, you know, what's the energy, what's the vibe. And I sent them a bunch of covers, things that I really enjoyed. I sent them some artists that I enjoyed, and Titus Kaphar was one of those artists. And they came back with some mock-ups of the book, and they gave me an image with one of his paintings. I was like, wait a minute, we could pick one of his paintings? Let's just do that. And so we did. We reached out to him, and he actually told us no. And he said no, but he said, you can't have this one, but you could pick another one. And I was like, say less, bro. You have so many incredible pieces. And so we kind of kept going through, and they sent me some more. I was like, this is good, this is okay, this is all right. But then I found this one, and I was like, this is perfect. And as you get into the book, some of you have maybe read some of it already, but this I was trying to get the image up on the screen, and I'm not sure it's not working. We'll figure it out. But okay, all right, there we go. Let's go back. You got to get close to it. Got to blow on it. There you go. There you go. So, you see the cover here, and the figure in this painting is actually the figure of Thomas Jefferson. And so this is from a Thomas Jefferson portrait. And Titus decided that he wanted to take that posture, that pose of Thomas Jefferson, and actually insert all the people that he enslaved in this image. And so this painting is called page 4 of Thomas Jefferson's farm book, whereby he lists all of the people that he enslaved. And so Titus Kaphar, the artist, was like, look, this is a visual reparation. I want to situate all of these people that he enslaved in this posture, and I want to give them the wealth that they never received. And so you can see how regally he is dressed. He looks like you. He looks like really dapper. And but you can see that his face is obscured to represent all of those folks that he enslaved. So when you read the book, you'll see that first the chapter 1 opens in Monticello, and then no spoiler, I end in Monticello. So it was perfect. It was a timely thing. When he said yes, I literally was crying all day. I was just like, this is such a blessing.
My God, I didn't know all of the background about this. This is, it makes so much sense. I was listening backstage to you read from the opening of your book, Losers and Trophies, where you quite literally, like your book title, confront white supremacy, often at a great physical risk. I want to talk more about that too. If that's brave or foolhardy.
Probably a little bit of both.
You told the one woman who said, it's our heritage, losers don't get trophies. And these are from the people who say, participation trophies are, not good, but yet they want trophies for losing. From the Confederate flag to Confederate monuments, to the ritualistic reenactments of the Civil War, to weddings on plantations. What do you think is behind the fetish-like, quasi-religious worship of the Confederacy? And even though the Confederacy lost the battle, do you believe that with the re-election of Donald Trump and the implementation of Project 2025 initiatives, they have, after 160 years of stunning patience, actually won the war?
Wow, that's a great question. The first part, I think, is nostalgia, right? It's that looking back on a time in which you were unquestionably in power, right? I think is that they definitely want to hold on to that, because I think they can sense it slipping, which is where we are in this moment, where we have this really return back to this rhetoric, to this time of this master kind of slave kind of economy, where we're getting rid of DEI. We're really trying to kind of destroy the word. The word diversity is like a dirty word now, which is kind of strange. So yes, I mean, I truly think that we are back at that moment. But I'm also hopeful, because I know we got out of that moment. And I think the way we're going to get out of that moment is to continue to fight, to keep pushing. The master has a different face, but the same energy, and we're going to have to keep fighting.
Ashe. In regard to these public monuments, you write, we need to spend time with them and learn their stories to determine their value. Can you expand on that specifically? Do you think there's a place in society for these Confederate monuments? And if so, where might be a place where they can be displayed in their proper context and with truthful explanation?
I think they deserve to be in museums, because, look, they were figures in history. That's fair. Absolutely. We don't want to erase them. We can't erase them, right? We need the villain in the story to have the hero, right? But they need to be in the museums. They can't be in these public spaces kind of littering our imagination, right? Because I think that's what's happening. I think that oftentimes we are walking past them and not understanding what it's doing to our subconscious, right? And the subconscious is the thing that you should guard most closely, right? Because those are the things that seep in without you knowing, right? You think that you are consuming one thing because you choose to, but you may not realize that you're consuming something else. And so I think it's important to kind of sit everywhere, not just in monuments, in public spaces, in parks, to kind of sit in the land where you are. You gave a land acknowledgement earlier. I think it's super important to always recognize not just the people who live there, but the animals, all of the ecosystems, the rivers, the waterways. I mean, I think we have to take a step back and recognize that we're just one species here. And I think we've, fooled ourselves to think that we are the superior. And I think nature is starting to kind of tell us, otherwise.
Holla back. The titles of these essays, to me, are just like, some of them are so brilliant that they need to like be their own thing. And in one of the early essays, which you entitled Plantation Visitations, which may or may not be about ghosts.
Yes.
You visited the Whitney Plantation in Edgar, Louisiana, and made a really interesting observation about a young boy who was prompted by his mother to speak publicly about the dangers of gay boys and intellectual acrobats, and the danger they present to black communities. I could not help but notice the irony there of how, after all of these years, plantations continue to help oppression prosper, as though these sites are contaminated and the radiation still poisons spirits. What was it like to visit these spaces? And what do you think the half-life of oppression is?
That's Robert. I have these questions. Like, what?
Five pages of essay questions, y'all. I'm not playing.
The half-life of oppression. Wow. All right, so the first question is, how does it feel to be in these spaces? And the second one is the half-life of oppression. So, really bizarrely, as a fourth grader, I had an opportunity to visit Thomas Jefferson's plantation. And that is one of the pivotal moments that kind of thrust me into who I am today. And I never forgot that moment. I never forgot some vague understanding that, wait a minute, like I was enslaved here, or my ancestors were enslaved here. And so when I go back to plantations now, I'm still that young boy. I'm still walking around with that innocence. I'm still that boy who was originally injured, right? And you can feel these ghosts. You can feel these things. I think I talk about at the Whitney plantation many moments where I just had to take a step back. Like I had lost my breath a little bit. I just couldn't understand what I was experiencing. And like you can feel that in your genetic memory. You can feel these spaces, in your genetic memory. So that's what it's like to kind of be at these sites and to kind of have all of your ancestors revisit you. In terms of, what was the second question? Oh, half-life of oppression. I wish I had to answer this, but I think that the answer is no, in a way. I think it lives with you. Like I said, like the genetic memory. I think there's ways in which these things arise without you knowing. Whether it's meeting or having a conversation with the ancestor and they are re-triggering you, right? Or whether it's seeing, Jordan Neely get murdered on the subway, right? These things re-trigger you, right? That oppression doesn't ever leave, right? And I think this book is about that. These moments where you're like, oh, it's a beautiful day, but it's also the day that Philando Castile didn't get justice. Right, and so we have all of these moments, and all of us out here can have someone that you attach to that their oppression lives with you forever. Whether it's Trayvon, whether it's Tamir Rice, whether it's Jordan Neely, right? We live with this, or in my case, I learned that I actually have a direct ancestor who was lynched. Right? And so some of us could kind of go back to that directly. And I think that, again, speaks to the title. All of this is open. Like, if we just open our eyes, all of this is around us. All of this is tangible. This is in our experience.
And so I guess to my previous question about bravery or foolhardy, It is sort of brave to confront it, since, as you say, it's something that's almost in the DNA as a muscle memory. So the only way we can actually deal with it is to confront it.
I think so. I mean, because I think otherwise it's going to emerge in a way that you can't control. I think if you can face it, if you can confront it, then you can start to have control over it. I mean, because, what's the alternative, right? We lose our minds, right? I mean, because I think this place will do that to us.
That's what happens.
Right? We wind up like the invisible narrator, and the invisible man living somewhere under a sewer when we just give up on life. And I think, I'm not a pessimist. I want to live the best life I can while I have it, right? And so because of that, I want to confront it. I want to try to own this so I can control it.
Okay, bet. So then you write, and this is in regard to your last name. This is how I came to be called Weathersby. I know. Somewhere in the story of my lineage, a Scottish man owned and raped my ancestor, giving her my name and a trauma that often resurfaces when I enunciate its syllables for strangers. The looks I get vary, and rarely does anyone hear the echo of slavery like I hear the echo of Hemmings in Jefferson. Sometimes I explain that my family was once owned centuries ago to remind them of the obvious. Usually, not always, I say it with a smile to absolve the listener from the crime. I wrote in my notes, why?
Why do I absolve them?
Why do you absolve them? Have you ever examined that impulse in you, in all of us, to absolve them?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Here's my answer. White supremacy is not about white people solely. White supremacy is a system that they have benefited from that they necessarily did not enact upon me directly. So it's not your doing. I'm gonna let you pass on that. You didn't enslave me. You didn't enslave my ancestors. However, you are still benefiting from my enslavement, right? And so I'm also often, maybe you can attest to this, I'm often a nice guy. That
let's ask Amma.
I think, this book is about that surreal moment when you are often accosted by slavery, right? Just walking around, you're like, damn, I forgot we live in a land that a lot of people here were enslaved, right? And many times, I don't like to think about it, but many times when I walk into a room the first day of class and people give me these looks, they're like, damn, I thought you were going to be this old white dude. I was like, well, there's an old white dude in my story, but he's not here. He's not here. So it is strange. It is strange. I walk around with that every day, like, Weathersby, I guess so. That is me, but yeah, so I mean, I can't ever divorce myself from the obvious, right? Especially since we're still living in that trauma. I would love to get to a day where that trauma has been repaired, as in reparations.
Okay, so you made a distinction. You said that white supremacy is not a people, it's a system that people benefit from. And to your point, in 1811 Street, one of your essays, you describe white slaveholders' extraordinarily brutal response to a slave rebellion that took place in New Orleans in 1811. This rebellion, much like Denmark Vesey's in Charleston, South Carolina, was undermined by other enslaved black people who warned the white slave owners of the coming revolt. What do you make of the following? One, how the histories of slave rebellions are often buried, erased from the social imagination, and replaced with stories of slave docility. Two, the details of the white slave owners' response to the New Orleans rebellion. Three, the treason committed by fellow members of enslaved communities. That last piece reminds me of an old adage that says, given the choice between comfort and freedom, most people choose comfort. Do you believe that's true?
For some of us, certainly. And look, man, I think it's hard. I truly believe all humans are redeemable. Even those people who betrayed us, I truly believe that all humans are redeemable. I think they were tricked in believing white supremacy, to believe that they were less than, to believing that their comfort was some sort of safe haven. So I truly believe that. I'll go back to the first question. What do I make of this not being taught? I think when I was at the Whitney Plantation and I learned about this rebellion, I was really, taken aback. I was in my 30s and I never heard about it. And I live in this place. I'm from Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans, and I never heard about it. And this is the largest in U.S. history. This is not just like, any, run-of-the-mill rebellion.
Make sure you share the details.
Well, so I'm gonna get to that, to the second question, their response. But I will say I am hopeful. I like to lean into hope. I am hopeful, even in spaces in Florida, one of the craziest places in the world in terms of education, and for other reasons. I'll let you guys debate that. But in terms of education, I just read about this recently that Black people, Black teachers, Black students have taken upon themselves, as we should, to have Saturday schools. To say, we're gonna learn from these banned books. We're gonna have our own education systems. We're gonna learn about our history. Maybe not in their classrooms, but we're not gonna fall behind because they tell us that we have to forget what happened. So I think that is what it's about. I think you find those banned books. I think you continue to kind of seek knowledge where they're telling that you shouldn't. Every place they tell you shouldn't look, you should go look there immediately. So that's my answer to that one. 2, their response was incredibly crazy in that they cut all of the people's heads off that they captured. And not just cut it off and be like, all right, cool, we killed them, but they put them on pikes. And they lined their heads from the German coast, which is like the plantation region in Louisiana, and their heads lined from that spot of the original rebellion all the way to the center of New Orleans. So some of you have been to New Orleans, and if you haven't, you still know this image that I'm about to describe. The image of New Orleans that most people have is Andrew Jackson on the square, and Andrew Jackson on a horse in Jackson Square, right? That is the iconic image of New Orleans in front of St. Louis Cathedral. And that is also the site where all of those heads were placed on pikes. And so because I know that, every time I see that image, I see those men. I see their heads, right? And so I think it's important to kind of see what's there and to also see what's not there, right? And I think I answered the last question, how do I feel about those who betrayed us? Look, I'm always about, you could be welcomed back into the family. We got to forgive you. We got to figure out ways in which your mind was corrupted. I need you to understand that. But again, white supremacy works upon all of us, where we start to believe like that kid that I listened to at the Whitney Plantation, that there's the vision that if you're gay or if you're not, practicing the teachings of Imhotep, then you are against the race. Like, so he has been brainwashed by white supremacy. So it's insidious. It's everywhere.
Thank you for that. I wish I had Irv's belief in humankind.
Robert and I often go talk about this. I'm an eternal optimist. I don't have any other way, but Robert, not so much.
I'm a realist. I'm much old, and I'm older than you.
He is older than me. Significantly.
Have mercy. Are you open to talking about your experience with Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah. I wrote about it. Let's do it.
I was interested in your perspective because upon thinking about your family members who had to be rescued and you surveying the damage of your familial home, which you refer to as a fallen monument. Okay. I'm wondering what the sight of this did to you, to your mind, body, and spirit, where the mess rests or does it rest at all?
So this is the image of my family home that Robert is referring to, and so this is the street on Andrew Street that, I never saw it in the state. My cousin took this picture. This is also in the book, but here's obviously it's in color. Look, it's a very traumatic thing to think about all of the things that we lost, and to think about. I saw Wendell Pierce talking about this. Wendell Pierce is also from New Orleans, if you don't know. And he's talking about how what's happening in LA is echoing that, right? When whole black communities are being destroyed. And we felt that viscerally. I mean, it's New Orleans. New Orleans will always be, at least in my lifetime, there's a pre-Katrina and a post-Katrina New Orleans. Always. And I still feel that way. When I go home, I still see that. I was just home last week for the release of this book, and I went to this site. And this, obviously this home was knocked down, but now there's another home that is being built on it, and it's not my family home. It's someone else that has bought the lot and now is building on top of us almost. And so that was hard, honestly, to see that, wow, okay, this is a whole nother structure that has come almost like, Wall Street building on top of our graves, So it's a conflicted moment. I would say that it's tough to kind of see your history kind of go away.
Speaking of your history, for those of you who haven't read In Open Contempt yet, I'm sure you'll agree with me with saying that this one person that Irv talks about in the book, Mama Nancy, will be your favorite person. That is Irv's great-grandmother. And she's in the chapter entitled, Have You Seen Our Sisters? And Irv, I just would love for you to talk about Mama Nancy, because she's someone who has seen so much, and she's not one of these sort of noble in the face of white supremacy type people. She lets you know from her heart how much she disliked, I'll say, white people.
I think the word was hate. You know what I'm saying? I think the word was hate. So look, when I met this woman, I was a young man, young boy, and I never liked her because she was just the meanest woman ever. I didn't, but I really loved her daughter, my grandmother, who, taught me writing, who really nurtured me. And so it was easy for me to be with her daughter, right? Her daughter passed away before her. And the last time I spoke to Mama Nancy, she gave me this incredible history lesson on our family. And I don't know, it was weird. It was almost like she was talking to me as if she knew that was the last time we were going to speak. And it was almost as if this was the first time I had actually heard her and seen her. And in this conversation, she had, kind of replayed a lot of her rhetoric on hatred and like how she hated white people, cracker this, cracker that, which again, I never really liked. I was like, this is weird. I don't, I'm old enough to know or that hate doesn't feel good. But she was unrelenting in her hate for white people. And she told me the story of her grandfather being lynched. And I don't know, it's just like the way I saw my great grandmother, her face, like her face went somewhere else. And I could just see that she had never healed from that. That she knew that her grandfather was lynched, and viscerally she held on to it forever. And then it just made sense. It was like, well, damn, who am I to tell this woman how she should respond to white supremacy, right? And that wasn't the only person that she lost. She lost her sister in a horrific fire. She lost her mother because her mother wasn't treated in the hospital because she was black. Her mother died of scarlet fever. And to think about what scarlet fever is now, my son has had it, and you get some, man, scarlet fever is just really kind of like, it sounds really devastating now, but it's really just kind of like a bad cough in a way, and a fever, and like you could just take meds and you'll be okay. So to know that her mother could easily have lived longer had she received care. And so she was telling me all these stories, and I was like, oh, I get it, and I was so thankful. I was so saddened because, again, I knew that I felt something that this was the last time we were going to see each other. She was 96 then.
How old were you when she died?
This was 2018 when she died. Yeah, so I'm on them. Do some quick math here. Yeah, this was 5 years ago. I was 39, I guess. Yeah, that's what it was. Whatever. You guys do the math. I'll be 44 in April. So.
You're 44?
I know you're gonna be.
I'm gonna be 54 in
54,
April.
God willing.
And I'm not ashamed. Okay, there's this little moment in the book that I wasn't sure if, I couldn't tell if it was a representation or if it was the truth. You're talking about Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln.
Mm-hmm. This is in this chapter here, yep.
Was she actually addicted to opioids?
Yeah, this is a true story.
She was addicted to opioids, y'all. Back in the day.
And this is this is after her husband was assassinated, yeah.
I thought it was, just something, that was in a play or something like that. I wasn't sure if it was historical.
No. So there's a play that was inspired by her actual dementia, I guess, that was brought on by her opioid addiction.
Okay. We were talking about the land acknowledgement, and so I want to ask this question about Native American and ancestry and such. Often, black people speak of having Native American ancestry in a way that seeks to grant them a kind of legitimacy or indigeneity, a way to be better than or something other than just black. The whole, my grandmother was a Cherokee Indian cliche, we've all heard it. We've discovered through DNA testing and other means that most black people do not, in fact, have Native American ancestry.
That's just a white man.
And those stories were devised to hide a much more frightening history of rape and rape culture. But even for those of us who do have some Native ancestry, like yourself, we discover that to bring it up is a kind of offensive to Native Americans, First Peoples, because of the ways in which they determine kinship, which has nothing to do with genetics or DNA. Can you talk about your experience around this? Because there was a really interesting point in your book.
Yeah. So this is in this chapter, in the chapter of Have You Seen Our Sisters? I go to South Dakota, and I'm just having so many moments of kinship with hosts of Native people, Native women. They're pulling me in. They're just welcoming me in ways that I hadn't expected. And maybe because I felt so warm, I asked a director. I was in an art studio, and it was like a poetry reading for Native authors. And I asked one of the men there, hey, I also have Native ancestry, so how do we, how does this work? And he looked at me and he was like, hey, that's kind of offensive. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. But he really told me that, look, it's not about ancestry. It's about how you show up for Native people. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons I got from there. Like, how are we actually showing up for Natives? I think one of the things that I don't often like about land acknowledgements is that they seem performative. People say them at the beginning and that's it. There's nothing else that happens. And so instead of doing that performative thing that we often do, in New Orleans, we have Mardi Gras Indians, we have Black Indians, we literally perform in this way. I decided that, hey, look, my grandmother told me that her grandmother was a Cherokee Indian. We have all of this Native culture in Louisiana. I'm going to go to Native country. I'm going to go to South Dakota and really engage with them. And I did, and I learned so much. And I think that's really what it means to show up for Native culture, to really then show up for Native peoples. And I think once we realize that the global majority, our enemy is we share the white man. We share white supremacy as our enemy. And I think that's where the kinship lies.
Thank you for that. Speaking of visiting, you visited Mount Rushmore. I don't know many people who have ever seen it in person at all.
Show of hands, how many people have been to Mount Rushmore? That's actually a lot. More than I expected.
That's more than I expected, too.
Show of hands, how many people have been to Crazy Horse? Not as many. Okay. No judgment. Publicly. I'm sorry. Yeah, go.
I have so many questions, but I'd first like to know how you funded your travels for In Open Contempt. Did you feel safe traveling as a black man into spaces where there are not many black people? Did you have some sort of green book? Or did you simply know the risks and were willing to take them in order to be a witness?
Wow, great questions. First question is CUNY, my employer, really funded a lot of this, honestly. I figured out a way to kind of ask for money to be smart and write books. And that's what I did. I figured it out. And so they funded a lot of it, at least that trip. Once I sold the book, I actually took a couple other trips as well with the money that I got from selling the book. Second question, what was the second question?
Second question was, did you feel safe?
Safe. Not always, for sure. Definitely not always. When I'm around, people that look like me, for sure. When I was in Native country, yes. I didn't always feel comfortable around those white people, though. When I was there, I had a moment when I was in South Dakota. I had a bartender tell me, I told him I was going to go to the reservation, and he kind of looked at me. He was like, "Hey, make sure you're careful, okay? Because like those natives, they're kind of tough, and they might rob you." And I was like, "Really? They're gonna rob me? They might rob you, but like." And I was like, oh, "Okay, man, thanks. I appreciate that, white man." But were there other places where I didn't feel safe? I don't know. Last question. What's the last question? I forgot the last one.
Last question was, did you have some sort of green book, or did you simply know the risk?
Yes, there was moments that I followed that, especially in New Orleans. There's a dope group called Take 'Em Down New Orleans, and they created this incredible database of all of the racist monuments in New Orleans and the surrounding areas. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna use this as my guide to kind of go through it all. And I think another one of my green books was just like trying to hunt down different artifacts, different monuments, different places or works of art. I was like, okay, let me go to this place to see this thing. And that's kind of was my guide. But I think after that initial moment in 2017, after talking to my great-grandmother, after remembering what Baldwin teaches, like you can't be afraid to be your best self.
I have so many more questions, but we're coming close. We're like we got like 7 minutes. So I'm gonna ask
speed round.
You don't want me to go to the speed round, because I actually have speed round questions.
I know you do.
Of everything you describe in the book, for me, the section "A Day in the Life of Chains," where you describe your encounters with police and the prison industrial complex, is the most harrowing. The specter of death haunts that chapter in present tense. Again, how did you make it through something like that whole? Or did you not? Did you, like ancestor Toni Morrison once said, make it through in part, in pieces? As an artist, how do you go about sharing that kind of testimony, knowing that for some people, it will be traumatizing and triggering, and for others, it will be tantalizing and titillating?
Wow. You should do this more often, man. You got good questions. You know what, man? I own the mantle of being a writer very early on. And I know that all my experiences, I have to testify. Like that's like I was given the gift to be able to articulate things and illustrate things for other people. And so it is my job to be present at all times so I can document my life. Full stop, right? And so whatever my ancestors have taught me and other writers have taught me, that's what it's about, right? So I can't be afraid to kind of say what needs to be said. However, I will say I got arrested in Williamsburg, and it was really really traumatic, for sure. And just not just the circumstances, but all of it. Just how I felt. Just like nothing. It's just like, wow, it didn't matter what I did, what I said. Like, I was getting arrested that night, although I felt like there was no justification for it, right? And it took me a while to actually go back to Williamsburg. It was, even now I don't love the neighborhood for other reasons, but that's one of them too. It's just like, this is the place where I feel that trauma. I see that I was, initiated into the criminal justice system. So, look, I got to face these things. I got to be present. That's my job as a writer. Like, as an artist, I truly believe that that's what artists are here for. Like, they have been gifted and they have to use it.
It's truly, people don't really understand this. Every time a black person encounters a police officer in that sort of situation, if you survive, it was a near-death experience. It's literally a near-death experience. When I see cops, I can feel my heart racing because I'm not certain of what they're capable of for no reason.
It's crazy, right?
It's ridiculous. So, like, you go in open caskets, you actually draw a parallel between the lynching postcards of yesteryear and the more contemporary virality of black men's extrajudicial murders being captured on smartphone video. You specifically cite Daniel Penny's killing of Jordan Neely, which is interesting because when you were writing the book, it wasn't even at trial yet. Yeah. But we know now that Penny was recently acquitted of all charges and was cheered on by a diverse audience on the train and in the courtroom. To what do you attribute this sadism, and why do you think black men have historically been society's most popular receptacle for it?
I think, white supremacy needs a hero, right? White supremacy needs Mount Rushmore, right? You need to have these guys here to make them feel better. And again, as I said earlier, in that hero-villain story, you need a villain. And I think we have been that for centuries, and I think we are an easy target. And so I think it's as simple as that we are often, the easy boogeyman, right? There's so many, there's these things, like, I saw this recently in an article that these theories that have been debunked about, like, the differences in race and, like, our body chemistry in our brains and, like, the way our heads are shaped is resurfacing, right? This whole notion that we are inferior as a race, although race is a lie, right? And I think it's very bizarre that we're still revisiting these things that have clearly been debunked.
You guys really have to buy In Open Contempt because of the deft way in which Irv weaves together these narratives so that it covers so much and yet remains so cohesive. I still marvel at the craft of this book.
Thank you, man.
We don't talk enough about the craft of nonfiction, but there's a deft craft here. You make convincing arguments, one, but the language is just so beautiful. The images are just so visceral. I think it's just a marvelous, marvelous work. I really, really believe that. And I'm trying to decide now whether to go to another question or go to the lightning round, because I don't know how much time we have left. Are we like 5 minutes out?
They haven't pulled the plug yet. We're good.
So should I ask you another question? Because this is one of the big essay questions.
Let's do it.
Okay. In the essay Retold in Past Tense, where you discuss your visit to Monticello, the Thomas Jefferson estate in Charlottesville, Virginia, you analyze the ways in which American society believes that Jefferson and a girl he held in bondage and eventually had children with, Sally Hemings, had a love affair. I couldn't help but notice the American through line, where the same society also called it a love affair when 34-year-old elementary school teacher Mary Kay Letourneau met and groomed second grader Vili Fualau, whom she began raping at age 11 or 12, and also had children with him. I'm thinking, too, of Trump, who has been accused of raping or sexually assaulting at least 25 women, including a 13-year-old girl, which didn't matter to the majority of American voters. What do you think this says about America in regard to rape culture, what we think rape is and what we think it isn't, who we think rapists are and who we think they aren't, who can be considered a victim and who cannot, and the resilience and longevity of rape and rape culture?
Well, this country was founded on rape, right? So, I mean, we can go through all of the men known as presidents who raped us for evidence, right? And I think it permeates even today. And I think, look, rape is always bad, full stop, right? But I also think that the way that Trump is seemingly getting a pass, the way that, what's this guy's exit? Seemingly going to get a pass like of sexual assault, is really glaring when we have other people, and again, rape is bad, full stop, but we have this incredible demonization of a black rapist currently in our culture, right? Or we are very comfortable with that and demonizing that. And
rape actually wasn't even a crime in America until, so if you are a white slave master and you rape your black female slave, the child will also be enslaved because the child in America follows the condition of the mother. It's matrilineal.
Yeah.
So the white men said, well, wait a minute. What happens when these white women rape their black male slaves and have babies? Will the baby follow we have a whole class of free biracial children. They said how we'll do it is we'll make it illegal for a black man and a white woman to have sex, and he will be a rapist. And that is when rape became illegal in America, and only in that instance.
Preach. Yeah, and so again, we're talking about this, the creation of the black buck, right? This whole notion of this unwieldy black man who's raping white women, which is, again, it's just that inversion, that idea that let's focus our attention here while we're still going to rape you over here. And one of the pieces that really kind of brought that home to me in this book was in Williamsburg, was Kara Walker's Sugar Baby. Show of hands, how many people saw the Sugar Baby? Okay, a lot of you, which is dope. If you haven't read the book, you'll see how I felt about it. And I mean, I think Kara Walker does an incredible job to discuss that narrative of rape culture in America and how we got here.
Time? Are we still good? Are we close? Okay, little. All right, so the generosity of the Brooklyn Museum, they are holding the Elizabeth Catlett exhibit open longer for anybody here who wants to go and visit. It ends on Saturday?
Yeah, the 19th. So you have the incredible privilege of seeing it on the eve of its closing.
Yes, so please, after you leave here, after you get your book signed, go and see it. Elizabeth Catlett was an amazing, amazing artist, sculpturist. She just did painter. She was just fabulous. And on that note, I would like to say to you, Irv, I'm gonna get choked up. Brother, thank you for having the courage to write this book, for traveling the mean streets of America to tell us what you saw. As I said in the blurb for this book, when James Baldwin talked about a witness, he was talking about you. You went to the trenches for us to tell us what you saw. And that, I'm not a Christian, but that is God's work. Thank you for writing this, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. You're going to make me choke up too, man. Thank you. I appreciate that. Robert has been with me throughout this whole journey. There's many moments where we are exchanging very tearful voice notes to each other. expressing our love for each other. But I think it's important that we all do that, not just as black men, but especially black men, to express our love. So thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
And thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Brooklyn Museum for hosting this. Thank you. Buy books.
If I may, before you buy all of our books, I do want to give you a little bit of insight into the Elizabeth Catlett's exhibition. I saw it a couple weeks ago, and it is fascinating. I just want to show you a couple of the pieces that kind of speak to me and also speak to me in the book. So this piece right here, can't really see behind me. I've always worked hard in America. This one really spoke to me. It reminded me of the chapter, The Deities of Water and Canebrake, when we're just talking about the work of black women in this country and how we have created so much. And she really encapsulates that here in this piece. So make sure you see that one. This one here is probably her most famous piece. And this one is really dope because what I love about Elizabeth Catlett is that she was an incredible Pan-Africanist. And so she did this while she was living in Mexico. She spent most of her working career living in Mexico and being in community with other Mexicans. And so she pioneered this process of printmaking. And she was able to kind of really bridge the gaps between Black American culture and Mexican American or Mexican culture, and so super dope. I'll show you another one that I love about her. One thing that if you take away one thing from Elizabeth Catlett as you go up, is that she didn't believe in art for art's sake. She said art has to work. Art is political. We need art to empower us. We need art to serve as a vehicle and as a tool for liberation. And that is what I loved about her. So make sure you tap into that. These two pieces are maybe her most famous 1968. If you know a little bit about the history of this country, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, and so there was a lot going on. Our cities were burning. We were upset. Things were on fire, and here she creates this incredibly massive sculpture. When you go upstairs, it's two-sided. Just really take time to sit with that and just to think about the brilliance and the context in which she created it. And another thing that brought me to tears is that Elizabeth Catlett finished her career in New Orleans. And she was working at Dillard University, which is an HBCU, and she was commissioned to create some sculptures, some public art. And just like all of her work, she said public art needs to work for the community, needs to work for the people. And I just, I sit on her shoulders, really. She was incredible. And so this piece here, you'll see in the collection there's a replica of it, but this is actually in New Orleans in Louis Armstrong Park. And what's significant about Louis Armstrong Park is the site of Congo Square. Anybody know what Congo Square is? Two people, a couple people. So that's okay, a couple more. All right, it's good. Y'all passing the quiz. So Congo Square in New Orleans was where enslaved Africans were able to congregate freely and have community. And it's really like a historic site now. And so that space is now Louis Armstrong Park, where there are a lot of things to the arts. And she created this sculpture as well as this other one here to Mahalia Jackson, which is where our Performing Arts Center is. So she was incredibly dope. She was really powerful. And I just love that she loved us. So here's a couple questions to consider as you go through.
Ever the educator.
Ever the educator. Is that me? Okay. But I want you to have a good experience. I want you to really engage and really appreciate that, look, you got to sit here and listen to us, but you also get this incredible experience to go upstairs and to engage with Elizabeth Catlett's genius. So thank you guys for coming. Buy all of our books.